Can you take your seats, please? We will start in a minute. أهلا سيدي.
معهم here kids.
Can you take your seats, please? We will start now because of the time. أرحب معالي الوزراء والسفراء والخبراء وبحضراتكم جميعا في الإسكوا في افتتاح المنتدى الإقليمي العربي بشأن المبادرات المناخية لتمويل العمل المناخي وأهداف التنمية المستدامة، وهو أحد فعاليات الطريق إلى مؤتمر الأطراف 27 للأمم المتحدة COP 27. ويعد هذا المنتدى واحدا من 5 منتديات إقليمية تنظمها الرئاسة المصرية لمؤتمر الأطراف 27 والرواد رفيع المستوى لتغير المناخ بالأمم المتحدة واللجان الإقليمية ال5، ومن خلال مكتب اللجان الإقليمية في نيويورك وتحت إشراف نائب الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة. يتناول المنتدى المبادرات المناخية لتمويل العمل المناخي وأهداف التنمية المستدامة وما تحتاجه الدول العربية من تمويل في ذلك التدفقات والفجوات الحالية. وستعرض الدول الأعضاء المشاريع قابلة للاستثمار Investable Projects التي من شأنها تسريع العمل المناخي. ونهدف اليوم إلى تيسير التفاعل مع مجموعة واسعة من الشركاء والأطراف المعنيين وربط المستثمرين والممولين من القطاع الخاص وشركاء التنمية بالحكومات. مش عايز أطول طبعا عشان الوقت، فنبتدي بالكلمات الافتتاحية. اسمحوا لي أن أبدأ الكلمات الافتتاحية بكلمة معالي الوزير سامح شكري وزير الخارجية بجمهورية مصر العربية والرئيس المكلف للدورة 27 لمؤتمر أطراف COP 27، وهي كلمة مسجلة، فليتفضل.
Distinguished participants, I would like to extend my sincere thanks Distinguished participants, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the United Nations.
Can I invite Your Excellencies to join the stage after? Okay, after.
Distinguished participant. I would like to extend my distinguished participants, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the United Nations, particularly the Deputy Secretary General and the Distinguished participants, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the United Nations, particularly the Deputy Secretary General and the United Nations Regional Commissions, as well as the United Nations Climate Change High-Level Champions, the partners to Egypt's COP27 presidency, in organizing this forum in a series of 5 regional forums on climate initiatives to finance climate action and the SDGs in the run-up to COP27. Egypt's presidency vision is that COP27 reflects our commitment to move from pledging to action as an implementation COP, where commitments become immediate and effective, moving rapidly towards full, timely, inclusive, and at-scale action on the ground through translating agreements and pledges into concrete initiatives, scaling up and replicating success stories to deal with the threat of climate change, and delivering on a transformative adaptation agenda, an ambitious, fair, and just transition in energy, as well as unlocking appropriate finance at scale commensurate with the transformation we all agreed to in Paris. While we all acknowledge the complexity through translating agreements and pledges into concrete initiatives, scaling up and replicating success stories to deal with the threat of climate change, and delivering on a transformative adaptation agenda, an ambitious, fair, and just transition in energy, as well as unlocking appropriate finance at scale commensurate with the transformation we all agreed to in Paris. While we all acknowledge the complexities of the current moment that witnesses multiple global crises and the associated political, economic, and developmental challenges, Egypt believes it is crucial to raise the threshold for needed action at COP27 through emissions reduction, scaled-up adaptation efforts, and enhanced flows of appropriate finance. This forum and the other 4 regional forums contribute to this implementation goal through a focus on facilitating engagement with a broad set of partners and stakeholders, aiming at accelerating public and private investments in concrete initiatives and projects in climate mitigation and adaptation, in line with the SDGs, contributing to narrowing the current gap in Paris-aligned financial flows. The adequacy and predictability of climate finance in developing countries is key to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. To this end, there is an urgent need to unlock climate finance through the massive mobilization of public and private resources for climate action at the local, national, and regional levels across all themes of climate action. This would include action needed to tackle the growing pressures on debt, domestic resource mobilization, and international tax cooperation. The potential to tap into the large pools of private finance, scaling up support for multilateral development banks and other development finance institutions, bilateral and multilateral concessional finance, and new and innovative financing instruments and solutions such as the use of special drawing rights, debt swaps, voluntary carbon markets, and leveraging private philanthropy. Furthermore, this would include also considering a set of de-risking tools to facilitate the transition of financial assets into financial flows from a strengthened response to climate change. I hope that participants in this forum will work together to identify and address financing bottlenecks, to learn from success stories of private sector investments, and share investment-ready climate initiatives and projects to spur further investment. Egypt's COP27 presidency is looking forward to seeing the forum's work coming to fruition through scaling up investment and finance to deliver on climate ambition and development goals, and to building momentum towards Sharm el-Sheikh and beyond. I thank you.
شكرا شكرا معالي الوزير. سامح شكري وزير الخارجية. الصوت واضح. دلوقتي احنا هنتنقل الكلمة المسجلة الأخرى الخاصة بالسيدة أمينة محمد نائبة الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة، الأمانة العامة للأمم المتحدة، وممكن نعرضها. وبعد الكلمة هيتفضل معالي الوزراء والسفراء على المنصة لاستكمال الكلمات الافتتاحية. لو سمحت الكلمة.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, COP27 in Egypt must be a meeting on implementation. It must deliver concrete results for developing countries in the Arab region and around the world. Today, I would like to highlight 3 priorities for swift progress on the initiatives that will be presented during this forum. First, all projects must be bankable and must respond to country-driven priorities and plans that help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. In the Middle East, states need urgent support to ensure water and food security and to invest in low-emissions technology to enhance resilience and enable a just and inclusive transition to renewable energy. Investments are also needed in robust social protection and decent job creation programs as a matter of moral and economic urgency. Second, climate finance should be equally allocated and support mitigation and adaptation goals. I hope COP27 will see serious discussions around loss and damage resulting from climate-related disasters. This includes expanding access to low-cost lending across the board to support investments, adaptation, and the renewable energy transition, as well as debt relief for climate-vulnerable, middle-income countries, and scaling up common-sense solutions like disaster clauses in debt contracts, allowing the suspension of repayments in case of hurricanes, floods, or earthquakes. Innovative financial instruments can also help, including initiatives such as the Climate SDG Debt Swap Donor Nexus put forward by the Economic and Social Commission for West Asia, ESQA. Excellencies, third and final, countries must make good on their commitments. Developed countries must demonstrate how they will meet their commitment to delivering $100 billion annually and double adaptation finance to $40 billion as agreed at COP26 in Glasgow. Specifics on targets and timelines will be the litmus test for the $100 billion pledge as a cornerstone of trust in the multilateral process. International financial institutions and multilateral development banks must also play their part. They must overhaul their models, including by going beyond GDP to facilitate access to low-cost finance and debt relief to all climate-vulnerable countries, and increasing their risk appetite to mobilize trillions from the private sector. For without the private sector, we will all fail. Excellencies, in closing, I want to highlight the importance of acting with the urgency and scale needed. Now is the time to commit and demonstrate the power of concerted action. I thank you.
شكرا للأمين العام للأمم المتحدة سيدة أمينة محمد. والآن أدعو معالي الوزراء والسفراء والدكتورة رولا للتفضل على المنصة لاستكمال الكلمات الافتتاحية. شكرا. شكرا جزيلا. وأدعو الآن السيد محمود محي الدين رائد رفيع المستوى لتغير المناخ لمؤتمر الأطراف 27 والمبعوث الخاص لتمويل خطة عمل الأمم المتحدة للتنمية المستدامة لعام 2030 لإلقاء كلمته، فليتفضل.
شكرا جزيلا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سعيد سعادة بالغة أن أكون في بيروت وبهذه الاستضافة المتميزة من الإسكوا. كل التقدير والاحترام للسيدة رولا داشتي وكيلة الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة والأمينة التنفيذية للإسكوا. كل التقدير والاحترام لمعالي الوزير ناصر ياسين وزير البيئة، المتحدثون الكرام معنا في هذه الجلسة، الدكتورة رانيا المشاط من الحكومة المصرية وزيرة التعاون الدولي، وأيضا استمعنا بمتابعة لما ذكر من معالي وزير الخارجية المصري السيد الوزير سامح شكري عن أهمية هذه القمة وتركيزها على الأبعاد التنفيذية، وما استكملته أيضا السيدة نائب الأمين العام السيدة أمينة محمد عن وضع هذه القمة في الإطار الخاص بأهداف التنمية المستدامة. معالي السادة الوزراء، السادة السفراء، وأخص منهم بالذكر سفير مصر صاحب الهمة الدكتور ياسر علوي، وحضرات المشاركين والمشاركات. هذه المحطة الرابعة في ترتيباتنا للأبعاد الإقليمية لقمة المناخ. بدأناها بمبادرة مشتركة من الرئاسة المصرية لقمة المناخ ممثلة في وزير الخارجية السيد الوزير سامح شكري، وبتنسيق مع الأمم المتحدة بعد ما عرضنا هذا الأمر على السيد الأمين العام والسيدة نائب الأمين العام والسادة المدراء التنفيذيين الخمسة المعنيين باللجان الاقتصادية الإقليمية، وأيضا بمشاركة من رواد المناخ وفريق العمل معهم، بما في ذلك أيضا المجموعة الخاصة بمبادرة غلاسكو لتمويل العمل المناخي فيما يتعلق بمكافحة الآثار الضارة للمناخ والتخفيف فيما يعرف بالجي فانز. بدأنا في أديس أبابا في بداية الشهر الماضي، تبعناها بلقاء في بانكوك، وثم بعد ذلك في سانتياغو، واليوم في بيروت، وآخر محطة من المحطات ستكون بمشيئة الله في جنيف، وبهذا نستكمل الأقاليم الاقتصادية الخمس. وفي هذا الاختيار عدة اعتبارات، أولها اعتبار خاص بالتنمية وشمولها وأهمية أن تكون للأبعاد الإقليمية مساهمتها في الإعداد لقمة المناخ. وبسؤال مرتادي قمم المناخ منذ فترة طويلة، أحسب أن هذه المبادرة في إطار إعداد القمة 27 هي مبادرة غير مسبوقة، تؤكد على البعد الإقليمي للتعاون الاقتصادي والتنموي، تؤكد على أهمية إعداد المشروعات بمنظور سلاسل القيمة، ليس فقط على المستوى المحلي أو المستوى العالمي، ولكن هناك مجالات للتكامل والمشاركة بين دول الإقليم الواحد. أيضا في ظل المشكلات الجيوسياسية حول العالم، قد يكون لهذا البعد الإقليمي مجالات لعلاج بعض العورات في التعاون الدولي تستكمله ولا تستبدله. الأمر العملي الذي قمنا به في هذه القمة، وهذا هو الموضوع الثاني، أنها قمة معنية بالتنفيذ، وبالتالي كل جلساتنا بما في ذلك جلسات اليوم هي معنية بإعداد المشروعات. لا مجال للحديث عن التنفيذ والتطبيق، إلا بأن يكون هذا مترجما في شكل مشروعات قابلة للاستثمار، أو هي بالفعل موجودة على أرض الواقع وهناك استثمارات ضخمة فيها. الموضوع الثالث ذو العلاقة ومرة أخرى رجوعا لما كان في أمر القمة السابقة في جلاسكو، أنه هناك المبادرة التي أعلن عنها ما يعرف بالجلاسكو فاينانشال ألاينس فور نت زيرو الجي فانز، وتعهدوا أن هناك 130 تريليون دولار من الأصول المالية المعدة والملتزمة بأن تمول العمل المناخي فيما يتعلق بمجالات التخفيف النت زيرو. وبالتالي كان هناك اهتمام من ناحيتنا أن نرد ردا عمليا. إذا كان هذا هو الالتزام من ناحية التمويل، فما هو الالتزام من ناحية إعداد المشروعات؟ وكان ذلك نتاج لعدة حوارات كانت مع الصديق العزيز السيد مارك كارني مبعوث الأمين العام للمناخ وتمويله، بأنه قد أعد ورقة متداولة أرجو منكم الاطلاع عليها، ما يعرف بالكونتري بلاتفورم أو الترتيبات على مستوى الدول في منصتها الخاصة بالتمويل. وكان من ضمن ما وضعه من شروط يتوقعها المستثمرون أن تكون هناك قائمة بالمشروعات القابلة للتمويل والاستثمار فيما يعرف ب pipeline of bankable projects. هو قال bankable projects بمعنى قابلة للتمويل المصرفي وتكون محل ائتمان. أنا يعني ذكرت أنه من الأحسن أن احنا نوسع المجال ونسميها investable projects، لأنه في واقعنا الحالي يعاني نهج التمويل العالمي للعمل المناخي من الانحياز أكثر لأدوات التمويل الائتماني والدين وليس المشاركة والاستثمار، وبالتالي هناك أهمية أن نركز على الاستثمار بالمشاركة. يعني في حديث كان للسيد السفير وائل أبو المجد عندما تحدث لمؤتمر بانكوك ذكر هذه الإحصائية الدولية أنه 62% تقريبا من التمويل للعمل المناخي يأتي من مصادر ترتبط بالدين، والأقل يأتي من الاستثمارات، والأقل يأتي من مصادر ذات عنصر منحة مرتفع. هناك طبعا استثناءات في بعض الدول، ولكن نحن نتحدث هنا في المجمل. إذن هذا اللقاء بالتركيز على البعد الخاص بالتمويل هو أيضا بعد خاص بإعداد المشروعات للاستثمار. يسعدني ونحن مقبلون على هذا الحدث المهم اليوم الذي تستضيفه بيروت والإسكوا وبمشاركة متميزة من البلدان العربية وشركاء التنمية من حول العالم، أننا نأتي بعدد من المشروعات بالفعل من المحطات الثلاث السابقة. 19 مشروع من إفريقيا في مجالات الطاقة والنقل، في مجالات الزراعة وصيانة الأراضي، في مجالات التحول الرقمي ذي الارتباط بالعمل المناخي، بمجالات تطوير، وهيكون في نقاش في هذا الشأن، تطوير أسواق الكربون، وأيضا ما يرتبط بالتعامل مع المحيطات والبلو إيكونومي، وأخيرا وليس آخرا مجالات المياه والعمل الخاص بالتنمية الحضرية. في أمريكا اللاتينية والكاريبي أتينا ب4 مشروعات بحجم كبير في مجالات التحول والانتقال إلى الطاقة الجديدة والمتجددة، في مجالات استخدام الكهرباء في مجالات النقل، وأيضا في الاستخدامات الجيدة والحسنة في الإدارة فيما يرتبط بمصادر العمل المناخي من السلع الأولية. وبرجع حضراتكم لما قامت به اللجان الاقتصادية ال5 بعمل مهم فيما يرتبط بالصناعات الاستخراجية، وكان للإسكوا عمل متميز في هذا الشأن، وهذا العمل مبني على النجاح الذي قامت به اللجان الاقتصادية ال5 بما في ذلك الإسكوا في التعامل مع الصناعات الاستخراجية بمعنى الاكستراكتيفز. فيما يرتبط وهناك أيضا مشروع رابع في الدول الكاريبية يرتبط بالتعامل مع التكيف والأضرار والخسائر الناجمة من العمل المناخي. في لقائنا في آسيا أتينا ب20 مشروع لتمويل الNDCs أو التعهدات الوطنية في مجال المناخ، وأيضا في مجالات المشاركة بين القطاع الخاص والقطاع الحكومي في تمويل البنية الأساسية وتطوير الأسواق المالية والشبكات المتطورة للطاقة، ما يعرف بالجرين جريدز. 20 مشروع. كل هذه المشروعات تمت مراجعتها، وهي الآن مراجعة مبدئية، وهي الآن في حوزة اللجان الاقتصادية التي قامت بالإعداد لها، وأيضا بتنسيق جيد مع BCG الجهة الاستشارية المعتمدة لرئاسة قمة المناخ، ومع عدد من بنوك الاستثمار بعضها معنا اليوم، منها HSBC، Standard Chartered، City Group، وعدد من البنوك الأخرى على مستوى العالم من بنوك الاستثمار، فضلا طبعا على الاهتمام المبدئي من عدد من بنوك التنمية. ويسعدني أن أرى بعض الأصدقاء من البنوك الإقليمية للتنمية، وأيضا من مجموعة البنك الدولي الصديق العزيز ستيف هامر معنا اليوم أيضا، وهو يعني خبرة ذات باع طويل في تمويل أعمال المناخ. ما أتوقعه من هذه القمة، ولدينا قائمة مبدئية وسوف أعود لحضراتكم في نهاية اليوم بعد متابعة ما سوف يدور في هذه الجلسات. أنا أشوف أنه هذا اللقاء اليوم على هذا الإعداد متميز في أعداد المشروعات أكبر من أي مرة سابقة، ولكن العبرة هنا ليست بالعدد ولكن بالنوعية وبالانتشار بين القطاعات المختلفة. يعني أتصور أنه هذه محطة مهمة، بالإضافة طبعا لكل الجهود التي تمت على مدار الأسابيع الماضية في الإعداد للمشروعات والتركيز على أبعاد الاستثمار. وكنا في مؤتمر تحت رعاية فخامة رئيس جمهورية مصر العربية في مصر، عقد على مدار 3 أيام برعاية أو بعمل من وزارات الخارجية والتعاون الدولي والممثلة اليوم بوزيرتها، وأيضا البيئة والمالية، حول موضوعات تمويل العمل المناخي بأبعاده الإفريقية، والتركيز على ما يمكن عمله في إطار متكامل بين موضوعات الطاقة والغذاء والمياه. ويمكن في حديث سريع مع معالي وزير البيئة في لبنان، أنه موضوع تغيرات المناخ ليست فقط مهمة في حد ذاتها لاستنقاذ البيئة والأرض من ويلات ما فعله الإنسان، ولكن أيضا هي تتصدى لأمور أخرى من أفعال الإنسان اليوم تسببت ضررا بالغا في مجالات الطاقة وأسعارها، في مجالات الغذاء والحصول عليها، وفي مجالات أيضا الحصول على المياه، ما يعرف بالشبكة المترابطة أو النكسس ما بين الغذاء والمياه والطاقة. القمة القادمة هي قمة حلول، قمة لا تتوقف فقط عن وصف الأمور بحقائقها. واحنا اليوم يعني بقول الأجانب ما عندناش مجال to mince the words أو يعني to sugar coat ما يجب أن نقوله. الوضع الاقتصادي العالمي في غاية السوء، أوضاع التنمية المستدامة في غاية التدهور، وضع التغير المناخي أسوأ مما بدأناه في اتفاق باريس ببعض الاستثناءات المحدودة. هناك تحسن ما في مجالات العمل المناخي في التعامل مع مجالات الطاقة لتخفيف الأثر الكربوني، ولكن الوضع الخاص بالتكيف مع العمل المناخي هو في غاية التعاسة، مع قدر من الدبلوماسية في استخدام اللفظ، لأن هناك تمويل محدود له. يكفي أنه آخر تقرير، ومعايا الصديق الدكتور جمال الصغير كنا معا في روتردام، وكان التقرير الموجه لأفريقيا بيتكلم عن 11.4 مليار دولار، منها وهي غير كافية، منها 3% فقط موجهة من القطاع الخاص. والمطلوب عدة أمثال لهذا الرقم، ليس فقط من القطاع الخاص ولكن إجمالا. أما ما يعرف بملف الخسائر والأضرار loss and damage، the loss and damage file is lost in action، وللأسف بتعنت غير مفهوم من عدد من الدول المتقدمة التي ترفض حتى مناقشة هذا الأمر، ويعني نتوقع بإذن الله أن يكون هناك تحسن في هذا الشأن. الأمر الأخير ما يرتبط بتمويل العمل المناخي، لقد وصفته من قبل، وكان في حديث مع رويترز منذ يومين وأؤكد عليه لأنه بعض الناس فوجئوا بالعنوان، وأنا ألتزم به. عارف هيزعل بعض الناس، ولكن لا مجال يعني للعمل الرقيق في أمر يؤثر في حياة الناس ومعيشتهم. وضع تمويل العمل المناخي يوصف بثلاثة: إنه insufficient, inefficient and unfair. إنه غير كاف، لأن نحتاج تمويل أكبر مما هو لدينا الآن بأضعاف مضاعفة مما هو متاح. أما أنه غير كفء لأنه يأخذ وقت طويل جدا من يوم التعاقد أو التفاهم مع مؤسسة التمويل حتى تحصل على التمويل. أما أنه غير عادل فلأن الدول الأكثر ضررا وتضررا من التدهور في العمل المناخي هي المطالبة اليوم بأن تتحمل التكلفة الكبرى في هذا الشأن. فليس في هذا الأمر أي علاقة لا بكفاءة ولا بعدل ولا بكفاية للتمويل. عند هذا لا نكتفي عند الوصف، ولكن نتقدم قدر الاستطاعة في هذه القمة بحلول. مشروعاتكم التي تقدم اليوم بالاستثمارات التي تهيأ لها، بالمشاركة بين البنوك، بنوك تمويل التنمية وبنوك الاستثمار، ومشاركة القطاع الخاص مع الجهات المعنية بالتنمية المستدامة حول العالم، هي حلول عملية نرجو منها أن تكون فاتحة خير على مجالات لزيادة التعامل الإيجابي مع تحديات المناخ، وتأتي كلها في إطار من التنمية المستدامة. عند هذا أشكر حضراتكم شكرا جزيلا، وأتطلع للنقاش في هذه الجلسات والتي سوف نحمل نتائجها بمشيئة الله إلى قمة المناخ إن شاء الله في شرم الشيخ. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا سيد محمود محي الدين على الكلمة. والآن أدعو وكيلة الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة والأمينة التنفيذية للإسكوا سيدة رولا دشتي لإلقاء كلمتها، فلتتفضل.
يسعد صباحكم جميعا. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to ESCWA. First of all, thank you for joining us today to this important event. And let me extend my thanks and appreciation to my friend Mahmoud Mahieddin, the high-level climate action champion, as well as the Egyptian presidency for their leadership for this COP27. Today is an important day. Effective climate actions need impactful climate finance. That's why we are so glad that Ministry Shokri and the Deputy Secretary General have put implementation at the heart of this year's COP. In the Arab region, there are a lot of innovative initiatives and projects that could make important contributions to fighting climate change and enhancing climate resilience in the face of rising temperatures and increasing erratic participation patterns. But all they need funding and investment. This Arab Forum is an excellent opportunity to forge partnerships and accelerate needs-based climate finance mobilization, including from the private sector. Colleagues, current climate finance in the Arab region falls far short to expectation and needs. To enable states to reach their climate goals and contribute to the achievement of the Paris Agreement, we need to improve the quality as well as the quantity of financing flows coming to the region. In particular, the following 4 things are very crucial. First, more climate finance commitment is required. Current public climate financing commitment to the Arab regions are very weak. Over the past decade, Arab states received about $34 billion in public international finance. Relative to the financing needs expressed for the climate decade, this amount is equivalent to less than 7% of what would be required to implement the NDCs of 11 Arab countries. Second, more grant-based, concessional, and innovative climate financing is needed. The region is currently facing a historically high debt burden of $1.4 trillion. In addition, interest rate hikes and the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine further increase the fiscal pressures and severely limit the fiscal space of governments to commit to climate action. At the same time, as we heard Mahmoud saying, it's not 62%, it's 87% of climate financing received over the past years in this region was in the form of debt-based instruments. Third, climate finance needs a greater focus on adaptation, particularly in the water and agriculture sectors. The Arab region receives about 20% of its climate finance for adaptation. And while the situation is improving, much more has to be done to build the resilience of lives and livelihoods across the region. And finally, our quest for impactful climate finance should look beyond pure financing. Countries in the region need to have an enabling environment for investment, strengthened legal and regulatory frameworks, and science-based rationale to secure climate finance. I will conclude in stating climate finance solidarity between the North and South is very key. And as we speak, forest fires are devastating livelihoods, droughts are threatening food security, and floods are destroying habitats and ecosystems, compounding migration pressures. I urge you all to financially commit, support, and make a difference to save millions of lives in our region. Thank you.
شكرا للأمينة التنفيذية للإسكوا السيدة رولا دشتي على الكلمة، وأتوجه بالشكر مرة أخرى لجميع المتحدثين في الجلسة الافتتاحية. والآن ننتقل إلى الجلسة رفيعة المستوى حول تعبئة التمويل المناخي، ومديرة الجلسة السيدة ميراند جبران، مستشارة وزارة الخارجية جمهورية مصر العربية، فلتتفضل.
صباح الخير جميعا. Good morning everyone. First of all, it gives me great pleasure to be here, first in Beirut, of course, and in this high level and important forum that we're keen to have it a successful one ahead of COP. So I think after we heard in the opening statement, it's time for implementation right now, at scale and in time. Having said that, it gives me great pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Maati, Minister of Finance, to give us some light on the green financing policy and the green bonds and all the effort that Egypt is doing to help in more sustainable way. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
شكرا جزيلا والسلام عليكم وصباح الخير. ويعني معلش هقلب الحديث باللغه الانجليزيه. Your Excellency Minister Sameh Shukri, COP27 President Designate Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, Your Excellency, Minister Dr. Hala Saeed, Minister of Planning and Economic Development of Egypt, His Excellency Dr. Mahmoud Mahideen, UN Climate Change High-Level Champion and UN Special Envoy on Financing SDGs, and also Ms. Amina Mohammed, UN Deputy Secretary General. Ladies and gentlemen, and all participants, good morning to all of you. It is my pleasure to be among quite a distinguished panel to discuss a matter of great importance to the globe. In a poly-crisis era, all the economies have been impacted by the recovery difficulties from COVID-19, the war in Europe, and its negative economic consequences, specifically the developing countries who are faced by a wave of inflationary pressures and tighter financing conditions, making access to necessary financing all the more difficult. With climate change, financing represents the cornerstone for the implementation of national pledges, adaptation and mitigation projects to contract the effect of climate change. The focus on countries' abilities is important, especially developing countries' access to green finance. Building capacities and technology transfer are also essential to ensure the applicability of project and investment to mitigate against climate change. Under the slogan "Together for Implementation," it is important to highlight that implementation cannot come without access to suitable financing for developing countries. It is one of the engines needed for making sure that countries can adopt, mitigate, and thus implement the necessary projects and policies that will turn the national economies more sustainable and greener. In that regard, Finance Day, which will be held on the margin of COP27 on the 9th of November, with attendees ranging from various orientations related to issues of climate finance. It will help provide countries the necessary space to work out the much needed details to make access to green financing much easier and on a wider scope. We intend to discuss the proper mechanism and procedures to reduce the cost of green borrowing, especially for developing countries. Sovereign debt for nature and climate investment will help shape the policy of green financing and sovereign debt management for a more sustainable economy. We will explore blended financing and explore successful case studies in shifting towards a more sustainable and greener economy for Africa and the developing countries. Ladies and gentlemen, the government of Egypt has adopted a national plan for adaptation to climate change. Protecting the environment became a cross-cutting aspect in national policies. Green economy and green development are now a part of our economic and social policies. In light of that, the Egyptian Ministry of Finance has developed an ambitious green financing framework that included the first sovereign green bond issuance in the Arab region, and the second in the Arab region and Middle East, and the second in Africa, for around $750 million in September 2020. Following this, we have issued a year later the impact report of the green bond issuance, highlighting the projects that were covered by the bonds. They relate to the transportation and water management sectors, which comprise two of the most strategic sectors for the government of Egypt. In addition to that, we were among the very few countries who were able to get a green loan of $1.5 billion to finance such green projects. The framework that was set up helped pave the way to issue potential green sukuk, further green bonds, and other financing instruments such as Banda and Samurai green bonds. This framework has paved the way for the private sector and financial institution in Egypt to tap the growing green financing market. We can recall the example of the Commercial International Bank, CIB, who set up in a following a green bond program and successfully issued green bonds of around $100 million. In addition, the framework that was set up helped us to put the foundation to potentially issue especially linked bonds, as well as SDG-linked bonds. All can be channeled into helping Egypt to meet its climate goals. However, with current global financing conditions, it is very costly to tap the international bond market, not just for Egypt, but for the entire developing countries, whether Arab or African countries. It is important to stress that we as Arab nations are among one of the lowest contributing nations to climate change. Despite that, our financing need to mitigate and adapt to that crisis are substantially, especially with our already existing needs to recover from COVID-19 and mitigate against the inflationary shocks on the back of the war in Europe. The current international financial architecture as it stands now need to change to ensure that easier access to green financing is available to developing countries, to be able to keep up with different mitigation and adoption strategies against a volatile and rapidly evolving crisis. This falls in line with our special needs during this tough time, such as low access to energy, increasing distress, climate-induced displacement, and socioeconomic impact, and accessibility to climate finance. Generally speaking, we were able to identify several important recommendations that would be taken to the IMF and World Bank annual meeting in Washington in October 2022 to voice the urgency of the matter. Most important of which are the following. One, reaffirming the focus on mobilizing resources for resilience and a new collective goal on climate finance, especially measures to support a just and equitable transition to a low emission and climate resilience development. Secondly, reducing the cost of green borrowing and enabling the role of international financing institutions and the multilateral development banks in doing so. Thirdly, addressing the need for liquidity in developing countries to invest in climate resilience through a new issuance of SDRs and RFI. Stressing on the role of using concessional funding and grants in blended finance vehicles as a catalyst for private capital. 4, providing meaningful debt for sustainable investment and or debt refinancing in order to manage debt in developing countries, including a climate-focused debt suspension and or refinancing initiative, DSSI G20 common framework for countries experiencing loss and damage events. 5, requesting that the maturity of debts be extended and affordable interest rate be applied to support the urgent and effective climate resilience investment. 6, reducing the cost of capital for developing countries, in particular by building harmonization on the deployment of blended resources to maximize the opportunity for issuance of SDGs and the climate-linked performance bonds. 7, building capacity, developing policy frameworks and facilitating issuance of debt instruments which use key performance indicators to better channel resources into sectors that are critical for climate resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, as we approach COP27 and Finance Day on 9th of November this year, the recommendations that were delivered will be the focus of our deliberation and discussion. In this point, it is crucial that we keep in mind 3 main objectives that will help crystallize these recommendations even further. Firstly, creating an enhanced negotiation atmosphere such as that green investment for both private and public are expedited to developing economies, whereby easier financing terms and access to green borrowing would help these developing countries to adopt and mitigate against climate change. Second, highlighting critical areas of cooperation where cheap financial support needs to be given in important projects such as green energy and food and water security. Third, during climate finance, especially to support adaptation projects in the developing countries, and to encourage countries to achieve the goals that were agreed upon in previous COPs. To that end, ladies and gentlemen, for the globe to face climate change, it is crucial that pledges and promises turn into action for this to happen. It is important that financing becomes easier, more adequate, and ensures sustainable economic development, one that is green and safeguards benefits for future generations. Thank you for much for your attention. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Now I give the floor to Her Excellency Minister Hala Saeed, Minister of Planning, Economic Development of Egypt, and we look forward to hear from her Egypt's effort in accelerating the just financing toward the SDGs. You have the floor, Excellency.
Good morning, distinguished guests, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My dear friend Rola Dashti, thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's a great pleasure to join you at the Arab Regional Forum on Climate Finance opening session and to participate, although virtually. I wish to be there physically, but I just arrived late last night, couldn't make it. So it's a pleasure to be part of this high-level panel on mobilizing climate finance, organized by the Egyptian presidency, the UN climate change high-level champions, and the ESPA. As we approach the COP27 in about 50 days now to the city of Sharm el-Sheikh, actually this forum is crucial, not just to take stock of the progress related to the climate finance in the Arab region, but also to ask ourselves whether our current level of implementation is keeping pace with our aspirations. It is worth attention that by the year 2030, it will take us at least almost the gap would reach about $400 billion to close the climate finance gap in the Arab region. Thus, delivering on climate finance will require significantly increased amounts of investment, strengthen partnerships, and innovative solutions. Allow me in this respect to underscore the importance we attach to forming partnerships and attracting increasing numbers of businesses, large and small, to demonstrate their solution to advancing climate action. And I believe this is a vital purpose of this forum, as it provides a much needed space for an open dialogue between representatives of the government, the private sector, and of course the international development community. Let me share with you some of the key policies that the government of Egypt has been putting into practice in this regard through a participatory approach, creating an enabling environment for climate action. First, we have started 2 years ago applying the environmental sustainability criteria to make our national investment environmental friendly. Currently, national investments in green projects account for almost 40% of our projects in this year, fiscal year 22-23, with a target of reaching 50% of green projects by the end of 24-25. Second, last May, Egypt launched its climate strategy that recognized a more systematic and strategic integration of climate change into the government activities. It aims to foster innovative financing mechanisms that prioritize adaptation measures such as green bonds, in addition to enhancing private sector participation in climate finance and, of course, promoting more decent jobs. Third, Egypt is continuing to leverage several policy tools to help attract private sector capital towards climate opportunities. So the government is advancing advancing a set of well-targeted incentives to support the green economy, including green hydrogen projects, waste management projects and recycling system, and of course, all energy efficient projects. All these incentives are being designed to augment the current Investment Act. Fourth, public-private partnership is critical in enabling Arab countries to meet the challenges of mobilizing finance and resources to address climate change. They all support the region's adaptation efforts and, of course, boost its resilience. We realize that Egypt's ambition to become a green energy hub will require significant investment from the private sector. This is the role the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Egypt is taking seriously, establishing itself as a trustworthy and reliable partner for investors interested in green economy projects in Egypt. The Sovereign Wealth Fund has been working diligently to crowd in private sector investment in different sectors in renewable energy, green hydrogen, green ammonia, water desalination, among other promising sectors. Additionally, ahead of COP27, the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development is supervising with the National Initiative for Smart Green Projects that has been recommended and presented to the Supreme Committee by Dr. Mahmoud Mohiuddin. And this initiative is now under the auspices of His Excellency the President. The initiative represents a sincere effort to face climate change in a more holistic approach to achieve all SDGs and actually to localize SDGs while also raising awareness with respect to climate change, as I said, at the local level, which is the more important level. The initiative charts a map for each governorate smart green projects, connecting them with funding agencies and attracting the necessary investment. The number of projects submitted for this initiative across the 27 governorates across Egypt has reached almost 4,000 projects across 6 different dimensions, including women, civil society, private sector, of course, in addition to, as I said, all smart and green projects. Ladies and gentlemen, while Egypt supports the effort exerted to accelerate work to reach carbon neutrality, we find it equally important to increase efforts in adaptation, which remains the priority for Egypt and Africa. Egypt is implementing now several projects to enhance its adaptive capacity to climate change, including the project to protect northern coasts from sea level rise in a partnership with the Green Climate Fund, the project of rehabilitating and cultivating 1.5 million fadans to better achieve food security and compensate for the land degradation and the erosion that is happening in the Nile Delta, the project to rehabilitate and revamp the national network of water canals at least 68 billion Egyptian pounds, which is almost 4 billion euros, in the context of mobilizing the traditional irrigation methods and improve the efficiency of using our scarce water resources. The project for improving the management of water resources, including the project of water desalination, using renewable energies, the project of wastewater management, and the use of projects for enhancing and modernizing irrigation technique, which is one of our structural reform agenda. As for the mitigation project, despite the contributing to only 0.7% of the global GHG emissions, Egypt spares no effort to promote programs and projects to mitigate its emissions. In 2015, as you know, the government has launched a feed-in tariff for the renewable energy to encourage private sector to invest in this important sector. As a result, Egypt now hosts the largest solar farm in the world, which is Bamban, and this is established through a multi-stakeholder public-private partnership. Egypt also hosts one of the world's largest wind farms at Jabal El Zayt at the Gulf of the Suez, and this is an estimated of almost $2 billion US. The projects of clean mobility, including the investment in electric trains monorail and the replacement of traditional public transportation by electric vehicles and vehicles operating by natural gas. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we must emphasize the urgent need to provide climate finance to developing countries, especially those that are mostly affected by the consequences of climate change, despite contributing to the least to the emission. This is key in supporting their efforts to meet their pledges. The current provision of climate finance for adaptation remains insufficient to respond effectively to the worsening implications of climate change. Moreover, in order to address current and future climate risks, we must significantly lay emphasis on the need to increase the scale and predictability of adaptation finance from all sources, including public and private sectors, international financial institutions, and of course, development banks and institutions. As Egypt values partnerships at all levels, especially through collaborating with international organizations and the private sector to expand its green initiatives, we recognize the enormous potential for the greater progress on the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement, which continues to serve as the cornerstones of our development plans and efforts. We must all collaborate to overcome these challenges and close the financing gap everywhere, not just in the Arab region. This is central to COP27's agenda and its mission. Finally, I sincerely hope that through this regional policy dialogue, we will benefit from an open discussion of the challenges that countries face and what must be assigned as our collective immediate priorities. And I look forward to a fruitful panel discussion and to welcome you at COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Now I give the floor to Her Excellency Minister Rania Al-Mashad, Minister of International Cooperation of Egypt. Excellency.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much. I think this panel has proven that size matters, being the most populous country in the Middle East. We're focusing on Egypt experience in different ways. But again, I want to first start by thanking ASQA, thank you, Rola, and also thank the champions and the Egyptian presidency for COP for putting the regional voices at the forefront of the discussion on climate action. What is very evident, and we've seen this in Glasgow, climate is a multi-stakeholder job. All of us have a role to play, be it governments, private sector, civil society, international community, and I see many friends that were with us last week in Cairo at the Egypt International Cooperation Forum, Egypt ICF, also the meeting of ministers of finance, environment and economy from Africa. As Dr. Mait read out, there's a communique that came out of the ICF during the meetings, a very important communique, and we'll make it available to all of you. It reflects the needs and the asks of developing not just African economies or their ask of the international community during COP. It has elements of finance, it has elements of debt swaps, it has elements of how to move forward on SDGs and country platforms. Maybe what I want to focus on is a very specific Egypt case related to COP. Being the Minister of International Cooperation, our job is working with all IFIs with the exception of the IMF and our bilateral colleagues. This work has been over several years, and what is very important about this work, it is country-led. And when I say it's country-led, it's very, very important because as we're talking about climate development, as we're talking about SDGs, climate action should not be seen as a burden on countries if countries weave in climate objectives within their development projects. During the ICF last week, His Excellency the President made that very evident in his opening remarks, where he said when he started with different development projects in 2014, climate action was at the heart of it. Just a few examples, Bin Ban, the big solar plant that we have in Aswan, is a mitigation project. It reduces the use of, or it reduces green gas emissions, and more importantly, it was based on structural reforms that the government did to be able to bring in the private sector, and we have several IFIs here who helped finance the private sector in such a big project. Similarly, projects related to water waste management, projects related to agriculture. So this concept of adaptation projects are also key, and they have climate at the heart. So as Egypt was moving from 2014 until now, climate was there. Maybe it was not spoke of as vividly as we are today, because I think since Glasgow, and one thing that we have to acknowledge is the rhetoric on climate has become so, and the narrative has become so strong since Glasgow across the different stakeholders, be it governments, private sector, or civil society, or even regular citizens. In June of this year, Egypt launched its 2050 country climate strategy. What is very significant about this strategy, it identifies all the projects that are needed for Egypt to move into its or accomplish its green transition between now and 2050. They have SDGs and the heart of the different projects. It also includes mitigation, adaptation, it includes scientific research. So it's a very important document that reflects the country's vision when we talk about everything related to climate action. Also, Egypt updated its nationally determined contribution, and that was also published in June. Of course, COP is all about finance and being innovative with finance and making sure that all the commitments and pledges make their way to implementation. And that's where our role comes in as Ministry of International Cooperation, being able to mobilize the international community behind the different projects that Egypt is trying to push forward to fulfill both its climate action as well as its development goals. And that's when we launched in July of this year Egypt's country platform for the nexus of water, food and energy, known as the Nuwafi program. Nuwafi in Arabic means fulfilling pledges. And all of you, for those who had followed the Egypt ICF last week, everyone who had to do with climate finance was there in Cairo, be it Secretary Kerry, Mark Carney, head of GFANZ, Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, head of EBRD. We also had a recording by Franz Timmermans from the EU. Everybody in the room was supportive of Egypt's country platform for Nuwafi program. The Nuwafi program is a subset of projects out of the 2050 climate agenda. It is country-led, it is country-owned. The G7 have the initiative Just Energy Transition Platforms, known as JETPs. The JETP actually are designed for the big polluters, those who consume and use coal. And our request was, we are not polluters. Our contribution to emissions is less than 1%. How come we don't have a special JETP for us? And that's where our Nuwafi program, Egypt's country platform for Nuwafi, is a substitute of the JETP. We've been able to mobilize not just MDBs and the international community, but also the private sector. During the ICF, there were roundtables related to both the nexus of energy and the nexus of water and food. The way we designed the platform, for every pillar, there is a key financial institution that partners with us. In the case of energy, it's EBRD, and I recognize Heike here in the room. For the water pillar, which includes several projects, it's the African Development Bank. And for the agricultural pillar, it's the IFAD. The idea of the platform is to have the technical advisory, is to have the grant component, to have the concessional financing, and all of this to be able to mobilize private sector engagement. So it's trying, as Rola mentioned in her opening speech, to move away from debt as a key financing source for climate action, but actually to use concessional finance to be able to draw in the private sector. We have a presentation on NOEFI which shows for each pillar who's the key financial institution and how the other financial institutions come in to support. We have at the end of the roundtables a joint statement that was issued that supports NOEFI, and it was signed by several of our partners in the international landscape. And I just mention here particularly the United States of America and GFANZ. Again, a very strong support to a country-led exercise and a country-led platform to be able to mobilize climate finance that meets the country's needs and ties this very important link between climate and development, climate and SDGs. Something else which is quite important, by COP27 we want to announce partnership agreements on NOEFI program on these 9 projects out of the 2050. Egypt is the president of COP between November 23 and November 24. During these 12 months, we will be able to mobilize the full package of NOEFI. This is what we're working towards. We have water desalination, we have small farming, we have use of solar pumps for agriculture. So this nexus of water, food and energy is very much intertwined and connected. So it's a very nice way to demonstrate that we do have projects that could be implemented, and it's in the spirit of the objectives of COP27, which are from pledges to implementation. And the other key message from the COP this year is the importance of adaptation and resilience. And this is why the focus on water and the focus on agriculture. There's full support from the political leadership on NOEFI, and we're very happy with the partnership that we are doing with the rest of the international community and the private sector that is included. And the private sector here is both local private sector that has worked on several projects related to energy and water before, as well as international firms which are have shown interest already. And hopefully by November 24, when we meet again, we will be announcing the full package of NOEFI, fully financed through different types of innovative sources. My last point is on a point that Rola also mentioned in her opening speech, that different stakeholders have tasks and responsibilities they need to do in order to move from pledges to implementation. Be it the government, be it the international and financial institutions, be it the private sector, philanthropies, and others. And what we try to do is to put together, and this is also done inclusively and collectively with our partners from the international community. More than 70 partners are with us. The Sharm el-Sheikh guidebook for just financing. We had a roundtable on the initial findings during the Egypt ICF, and this is going to be launched officially during Finance Day, November 9th in Sharm el-Sheikh. The guidebook is a collective piece of work. It echoes the voices of different institutions and different stakeholders, both state and non-state actors. It hasn't been an easy task to try and converge on messages, but we've been putting these different voices together. I want to acknowledge Steve here as well on the work that has been happening on the guidebook. Finally, on innovation. And innovation has been discussed as trying to look for solutions that involve startups, involve digital art, involve the young people in the region and globally. And that's why we also launched Climate Tech Run. It's a global competition for innovative solutions into adaptation and mitigation problems or climate problems, and it's also a competition for digital art. There's a special prize for Africa. This has been done in partnership with many of the international firms that support startups, be it Google, Afri-Exim Bank, Microsoft, and many other institutions. There's a website for Climate Tech Run, so please, for you in your different networks, please ask everybody to apply. The door closes on the 22nd of September. The shortlist will be announced on October 5th, and the shortlist is going to be invited to Sharm el-Sheikh during Youth Day on November 10th to be able to present, and then there's going to be 12 months of boot camping and incubation and so forth, trying to push for innovative solutions on the key problems related to climate action. These are just a few highlights, but again, to conclude, Egypt's country platform for NOEFI is a replicable country platform. It can be done in other countries, and this is what we are working with different networks to try and do, be it in Africa or other regions that can actually see how a country can come together, have a clear vision, try and mobilize the international community, and move forward on both climate and development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And now I give the floor to His Excellency, Minister Nasser Yassin, Minister of Environment of Lebanon, who can tell us what's the importance of climate finance and at this turning point, an important turning point for Lebanon, and how it can be an opportunity for driving reforms and development.
Thank you very much. Sabah al-khair. I'm going to say a few words in Arabic before I go over my talking points. Your Excellencies, شكرا على هذه الندوة المهمة جدا. دكتورة رولا دشتي، شكرا على تنظيم هذا الموضوع الذي يعني هو أكثر شيء يشكل أرق للحكومات هو التمويل. فيعني سأهتم أكثر بالنقاط التي سأذكرها حول التمويل، ولكن أود أن أقول أهلا وسهلا بالزميلات والزملاء من مصر. يعني أتحفون اليوم بهذه الأفكار، وعندما يعني تستمع إلى الأخوة المصريين تترك الوقت، خلاص ما بيعود في وقت، دقيقتين ثلاثة أربعة، لأنه نستمتع بما قدموه ونتمنى لهم كل التوفيق بتنظيم قمة المناخ القادمة. I want to focus now and shift to English into a key subject that's really that we need to tackle at the level of government, which is finance, but particularly climate finance. For long, climate finance, climate change in general, but also related to it, climate finance. But climate change has been treated as something separate, ad hoc from the mainstream discussions on economic and social matters, or from the economic and social realms. And today this approach no longer holds. Not because we're living in the climate change only, or living the repercussions of climate change, because of the demonstrated economic impacts, the business risks, and the windows of opportunities for growth. Climate change, particularly climate finance, has been seen in the global socioeconomic policies and corporate board decisions. And this is the key element that we need to discuss. If the world is changing, and we need to look into climate change as something to discuss in every matter in economic and social policies, as well as environmental policies, we need to look at climate finance as a main foundation in the discussion of financing development and financing economic recovery. So for us in Lebanon, living in a multifaceted crisis that we're going through, we're in a position of choice where we want to decide how we want to recover. So I want to talk a bit about how we look into the recovery in Lebanon, albeit slow, albeit being hampered by the political structure in Lebanon and all the debates, but we're keen on putting the foundation for the recovery, social, economic, and environmental recovery. And the key concepts which should be at the core of this recovery are three: sustainability, resilience, and accountability. These are the three concepts that we want to instill in the recovery process of Lebanon. And it just so happens that those concepts are embedded in climate action. And in Lebanon's 2020 NDCs, this is a testimony of our strong belief to drive out our country to the path of green economic recovery and green growth. So, climate finance and accessing climate finance represents for us a unique opportunity for the government to reach a macroeconomic stability, which has to be green, inclusive, and would confirm with us, that we leave no one behind. It's also an opportunity for the private sector, and this is key. It's an opportunity for the private sector to move from the addiction to easy money that they used to get, as well as the government. In Lebanon, for the past few decades, we need to build this opportunity for climate finance, to create innovative business opportunities that will help energize the economy and actively build a sustainable future. For long, Lebanon, and being honest and frank and transparent, has been relying on easy access to money. This is actually at the essence of our crises at the moment in Lebanon. So we need to move out of this and look into those innovative ways of financing, including climate finance. And we believe that access to climate finance can accelerate policy and fiscal reforms to enable the sustainable use of Lebanon's land resources, reduction of polluting practices in agriculture, waste management, industry, as well as enhancing the resilience of water resources and infrastructure, and ensure energy, water, and food security. These solutions go in tandem with Lebanon's economic recovery and revenue increase to the government, which are crucial steps to emerge from the current crisis. Of course, a lot of challenges persist, including the lack of accessible finance until now. The need to restructure the banking sector is key. And this is, again, an essence of all the problems we have in Lebanon. Dr. Jamal Saghir, we've been in discussion before government about this huge hole we have in the banking sector that we need to reform. Currency-related limitations, and above all, the necessary IMF reforms or the IMF program reforms to overcome many of these challenges. In addition, accessing climate finance can be difficult, as international funds such as the Green Climate Fund and other donors, other investment funds, as well as future facilities like the Lebanon Green Investment Facility, which the Ministry has launched last year and we're still building, all have strict requirements that require a lot of reforms that the government and private sectors need to go through. Therefore, we're all aware that we need to improve Lebanon's governance, transparency, and accountability to boost our chances for tapping into climate finance. These instruments are key for us, and they're key for any transformational low-carbon or climate-resilient projects, something we're working on every day in the climate change program or team at the ministry, as well as all the team at the ministry. By being the focal point as a ministry to most of the climate change funds, including GCF, Adaptation Fund, and GEF, the ministry hopes to further integrate climate action and sustainability in Lebanon's future by improving access to a wider pool of financial instruments. These are key to build a low-carbon economy and a climate-resilient future. We fully believe that to build back better, to build Lebanon back better, recovery must be green, built on the foundations of sustainability and good governance. So thank you for bringing us all together here to discuss these important issues, but also to bring them to Sharm el-Sheikh to take them further with our partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now I turn to Ambassador Anne Dismore, Ambassador of Sweden in Lebanon. Sweden is a long-standing partner to the countries of the region in the field of climate change and natural resource sustainability, where climate finance is part of that. Could you please highlight what are the Swedish priorities are in this regard, and from your perspective, what are the regional gaps that need to be identified in the regional climate and finance landscape? Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gobran, and good morning, everyone. I'm very honored to be included in this very prominent panel. Ensuring adequate climate financing is a necessity in order for us to achieve or to meet the Paris or the goals of the Paris Agreement. And I would like to highlight three key relevant issues in the regional climate finance architecture before connecting it to Sweden's development strategy. Firstly, let me begin by emphasizing the importance of mobilizing innovative climate finance. The climate finance gap in the region is high, and tackling climate change requires going beyond the traditional financing. And the role of public financing is crucial. But addressing the funding gap will also require mobilization of the private sector and capital markets. And I think what you said about the banking system and the reforms in Lebanon, Dr. Yassin, is a very important point. Secondly, governments and institutions of the region need to have proper capacity to adopt climate finance to the local context. And for example, the need for technical support in order to set up legal and regulatory schemes to certify green businesses and to conduct feasibility studies is an important avenue in attracting private investors. Thirdly, there's a need to create an overlap between the finance adaptation and the mitigation measures. And one successful example of this is the Swedish support for the Water Energy for Food Innovation Hub, which has its headquarters here in Beirut. And through this, innovators from the MENA region can now access the support and investment matching necessary to make food production and farming more sustainable and more productive and bountiful. Well, climate change is a significant threat, and people living in poverty are especially vulnerable to its impact. And since climate is cross-border by nature, building trust across countries for a more effective regional cooperation is a key priority for Sweden's support to the region. And we're very proud to contribute to address the unique challenges within the MENA region, being among the largest donors per capita to both the Adaptation Fund and the Green Climate Fund. And Sweden, we approach the climate finance within our overall climate action efforts. And this is highly correlated to the three following priorities. 1, poverty. 2, human rights. And 3, peace and security. Sweden considers poverty to be multidimensional, including a lack of resources, opportunities, and not having a voice or lacking having a voice. And being poor from a climate perspective means that you lack power over the natural resources and do not have the opportunity to take part in innovative climate solutions. And secondly, we advocate a human rights-based approach within climate action to ensure that all human rights of local communities and other marginalized groups are fully considered. And meaningful and inclusive participation is fundamental while practicing a human rights-based approach. Finally, climate action is also linked to peace and security. Degradation and overexploitation of environmental resources is challenging people's ability to work and secure a livelihood, which increases the risk of conflict and instability. And climate finance mechanisms can contribute to peace and stability by leveraging the convening powers of economic benefits, creating new platforms, and bringing together diverse stakeholders. And to conclude my intervention, I would like to emphasize that transformative and systematic change is needed to drive the climate finance landscape in the MENA region. And that requires a holistic approach, where cross-cutting issues like gender equality and inclusion are made explicit and properly addressed. And in order to meet the ever-demanding challenges of climate change, it's so important to recognize that everybody has a role to play. And the climate finance architecture is such an important aspect of this. And therefore, I would really thank very much to ESCWA and other organizers of today's event for bringing us together. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And with that, I'd like to end this high-level panel, and thank you all for your rich and important intervention that kick off the day, and looking forward to successful meeting at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miranda. We're going to proceed directly to the next round table, but if I could ask Dr. Mahmoud, Dr. Dashti, Ambassador, and thank you for your extended participation. I know you have a thing if you'd like to descend. We are going to start up with the next round table. Are you able to, I know you have commitments, were you able to stay still more with us? Yes. All right, and while we are getting set up, can we run the Ricard video? And I'm going to invite the countries to please join us on the stage. Just 1 second, just 1 second. Can you just pause it 1 second? Madame Fazia from Algeria, if you could please join us as we start the next. Mr. Ziad Hamoudi, اتفضل. Mr. Rad Banihani. Mr. Zahir Al-Abri, من فضلك. اتفضل. And Mr. Rabi Kifi from Tunisia. If you could join us on the stage, and while you're coming up, we'll run the Ricard video as we start up the next roundtable.
Climate change is one of the main challenges of our time, particularly for the Arab region, which is growing more vulnerable to its impacts. Ricard estimates that temperature in the Arab region has already increased by almost 1 degree Celsius, and temperatures could rise by up to 4.8 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, which could further affect water, energy, and food security and the health of people and their livelihoods, as well as urban and rural areas and ecosystems. Water security is at risk due to factors including changing rainfall patterns, which cause droughts and flash floods that hit the most vulnerable. In a region with less than 10% of arable land available, agricultural outputs are decreasing. Changes in biodiversity are also recorded, threatening food security and livelihoods in coastal and rural areas alike. Despite being one of the most vulnerable to climate change, the Arab region receives less than 5% of global climate finance flows. Loans exceed grants by 7 times, with 3 times more financing going towards mitigation than adaptation, even though adaptation is the region's priority. A needs-based approach to climate finance is essential. Urgent action is needed to limit the impacts of climate change and to meet the SDGs. Implementation requires innovation, finance, and capacity building to help states reduce risks and enhance their resilience. Governments need innovative financing instruments such as the Climate SDGs Debt Swap and Donor Nexus Initiative. Business models that empower women in rural areas through renewable energy projects such as Regent, and programs that enhance the science policy interface to inform regional dialogue. Let's act together for a better tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a little teaser to show you from the video, obviously that climate change impacts in the Arab region are significant. We are one of the water scarcest, we are most vulnerable, we are being hit by impacts both from water and food, and of course energy, although a very important part of our economy, we're also energy vulnerable because many of our countries do not have sufficient energy resources also to meet our development needs. So we are really delighted in this first roundtable to talk about adaptation, and based on country project priorities developed by you the countries, based on your priorities to examine. In order to show you the list, if we can put up the PowerPoint, just to start up, just to realize how many projects you actually have in mind that you are prioritizing. These are just about 4 per country, to show that when we invited countries, to say what are your priorities on climate action, most of you asked for adaptation projects. We did not influence, we did not encourage, but you came back showing how important adaptation is in the region. But as you can see from the policy notes in front of you, money is coming here for mitigation. That does not discount the importance of mitigation. Please, we are not trying to say that we all have to move forward on our goals. However, when a region like ours is prioritizing the projects to present here on adaptation, programs like the important conference that happened last week in Cairo, are ways that we can make sure that we have a needs-based approach to climate finance as discussed by our partners. So you have online, and all of you have access to the free internet and access on your phones to all the fact sheets, the 30 fact sheets that countries have provided. And you can see here that of those, a majority, 22, were on adaptation. And can we make the screen shoulder? Because I think it's about 3.3 billion coming out of that total requested for adaptation projects, and less than $1 billion for mitigation projects. And then if we go to the next slide,
Specifically, we see that the focus on adaptation is on water, supply sanitation, water resources, irrigation, where we see that nexus that was mentioned by Her Excellency between water, energy, and food, and of course the issue of resilience, be it through land degradation, or our coastlines, which we are looking forward to feature by you later on the day. And of the projects showcased today, we see, though, that a majority is the water resource story, because that is the driver of development. Just to give you a sneak preview of the afternoon, if you can just change to the next slide, please. Mitigation, of course, is an important one as well. We will have projects this afternoon highlighted and moderated by our colleagues at the high-level champions about renewable energy, energy efficiency, transport, and the importance, like the nexus, of co-benefits, where there are benefits for the energy sector, but also for water and the provision of agriculture for food security, also addressed in the afternoon. And this just gives you a sense of all those projects, those 30 that you see already on the website, that you will see right now highlighted by our colleagues and their priorities. So let's get right into it. We're just setting the stage here. We have a very brief 3-minute intervention by our esteemed colleague at the Global Center for Adaptation, Patrick Verkong, who has just had a global summit for Africa, preceding the one held in Egypt, in Cairo last week, that helps to identify some of the catalysts for climate adaptation finance for the region and for developing countries. If we could proceed with Patrick's intervention. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here at the last minute, so here.
Team for convening this important discussion. It is important because adaptation isn't just the right thing to do. North Africa and the Middle East. Because we all know the message from climate scientists is alarming. Climate impacts are hitting harder and accelerating faster than we previously thought. And you know this, the MENA region is one of the most water-scarce regions in the world, home to 2/3 of the world's most water-stressed countries. Water scarcity will cost Middle Eastern countries up to 14% of their GDP by 2050. And all the challenges which you face today, including unemployment, low growth, food insecurity, fragility, and conflict, are made worse, much worse, by climate change. Food prices continue to soar. Faced with that, we're obviously going to need more resilient agriculture. We need safety nets, we need higher water productivity, and we need better irrigation schemes. The COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine have underlined the importance of building resilience. And with much of the world climate change. Because we know all too well, climate change is not tomorrow's problem. It is with us here today, and it will increase over time. And hence, adaptation is important today because the climate crisis is here today, and it will only get worse. These challenges actually are also opportunities for growing a more sustainable, resilient economy and creating new jobs. The potential for job creation through adaptation is enormous. Now we know that access to adaptation finance in your region is not easy. Of the $26 billion received in total public climate finance over the past decades, an average of only 20% was directed at adaptation projects. And I firmly believe that we must do much more. And for this reason, GCA is offering to be your partner of choice. Let me give an example. Climate science, innovative tools and technologies, and best practice policy solutions from around the world into investments on the African continent. Let's go to Morocco. In Morocco, Adaptation of African Agriculture Initiative, we are providing technical assistance, identifying financial channels, and focusing in particular on the opportunities for mainstreaming digital tools to build resilience in agriculture. In Egypt, GCA is joining hands with the African Development Bank and the Islamic Development Bank on a capacity building program of climate resilient infrastructure projects where adaptation and resilience solutions will be mainstreams. Global leaders came together to support the AAAP at our last week's Africa Adaptation Summit, here at our headquarters in Rotterdam, on the world's largest closing office. Through the AAAP program, which is quite frankly unmatched in its ambition and scale, we have already workable and scalable model beyond the program's focus on Africa. The AAAP is already delivering for Africa, but imagine the transformational possibilities for your GCA. We have the skills, we have the knowledge, we have the experience and the expertise to do so. Let us not forget, adaptation is the road to a safer, more resilient, more prosperous future for Arab countries. And we know the sooner we begin the journey together, the faster we will reach our destination. And let me end here with a very simple truth. Adaptation, if done right, is not just a vital imperative. It's also a major economic opportunity. I look forward to joining you on this journey. I thank you very much.
Thanks is extended to the Global Center on Adaptation for the intervention, an outcome of their event last week. He had to go to Senegal at the last minute, so again, his apologies extended for not being with us. But we are delighted to again have the opportunity to hear about, again, country-level projects. Not only the GCA, but there was a major event in Egypt last week. I know that Egypt has had leadership, as you mentioned. The scale of Egypt dominates